Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Forum. Today, I'm delighted to have with us Ms. Christine Cipolla. Ms. Cipolla is Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific for the International Committee of the Red Cross. Thank you so much for joining us and taking out the time.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Christine, I wanted to start off with a discussion very briefly on the region that you're looking at, Asia and the Pacific. This is an immensely large region. We're talking about billions of individuals, a variety of political systems, cultures, languages, ethnicities. How does the ICRC operate to gain access for its important humanitarian work that it does?
No, thank you. This is an extremely important question you are asking, a crucial one. For the International Committee of the Red Cross, having access means being in proximity with the civilian population.
Of course.
And here it is about being close to the needs of the people, the suffering they have. And in order to be there, to bring assistance, to bring protection, to be with them, we need an access. And access is something that we do negotiate with parties to the conflict in a given situation of conflict or violence, in terms of having ICRC teams having a secure access to the civilian population. So in terms of security, we have to negotiate those. And also in terms of trust and negotiations, we need to have the trust of the parties to allow this humanitarian assistance to be channeled through us. And for that, sometimes we need to negotiate a lot. We need to work in transparency. We need to be predictable, but also we need to work in accordance to the principle of action, such as independence, neutrality, impartiality. And those are key elements that really are helping us in our negotiations to gain access to the civilian population. And that proximity is absolutely key, because without that proximity, working in remote areas, you have less clear, you are less close to the population, so then you can help them differently. So
no, that's very interesting, and I think one of the biggest issues that we're facing now is really looking at the complexity of conflict and the complexity of the humanitarian crises that we see around the world. Do you feel that within this complexity that is arising, has it become harder for issues of access, issues of being able to address organizations like the ICRC or other humanitarian organizations to address these more complex crises that are taking place?
Indeed, you are very right. And I think these complexities have been there for a while and are only increasing. And here, maybe we can talk about this urbanization of conflicts.
Absolutely.
You have seen those through the latest wars. We have that in Syria. We have that in several parts of the world, where you see that the world is changing. The cities are getting more urbanized, and hence the war is as well getting more urbanized. Absolutely. And here, these are the facts that we realized. Here we have a cumulative effect of, if you want, in one hand, the conflicts that previously would take place in remote areas or rural areas that are getting closer to towns. And here you have this cumulative effect here. So here we are with a lot of infrastructures that are being destroyed. And I saw that recently in Afghanistan, for example, where the conflict took place, the protracted long-term conflict that took place over the years, two or decades, 3 decades, exactly, where you see that critical infrastructures has been destroyed. And here we are talking about critical ones, hospitals, water supply, electricity supply, morgues, where you bring in the persons who have died in the battlefield, and you cannot cope anymore with those infrastructures, because whenever you bring in, they are overwhelmed by those needs. It means that having those systems destroyed would bring side effects that you have not planned first. So this urbanization of war is really something that is of a key critical concern for us. And for that, we are trying to have the international humanitarian law position here. I think it's important that we mention that respect of international humanitarian law during warfare operations. That's really important for any army or parties to the conflict that are involved in
Whether
those.
these are in urban areas or in rural areas.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And to avoid as well using the weapons with a wide impact in populated
Of
area
course,
in
absolutely.
particular. And here you have heard about this explosive weapon in populated area, for which the ICRC is really much supporting ongoing discussions here with states and on to have a political declaration, a state political declaration on this explosive weapon in populated areas.
I see.
That could be, a statement, a stand that the state would take there. And our position here has been always, given the suffering and the long-term as well effect on those, the impact of the urban warfare is to really avoid to avoid explosive weapons in populated area, to really avoid them.
Absolutely.
And hence the political declaration around today 80 states are discussing with that and are participating for consultations.
That's very encouraging. That's very encouraging.
That's very encouraging, but we need to continue doing more on that one.
Of course. And just staying on the topic of urbanization of conflict, how do you feel, the ICRC has to adapt to this, this new trend that we see where urbanization, conflict is shifting towards more urban settings? Are there particular things that humanitarian organizations are adapting to see this new reality, especially when we see that, urban settings, all of the factors in conflict suddenly get exacerbated, right? You have greater concentrations of population, easier recruitment for non-state actors or more targets, their funding for such groups. All of these factors come in. So how does, a humanitarian organization then adapt to the humanitarian crisis that could come about?
Yeah, that's an important question, and I think here comes the cumulative effect of this war, which for us it's not anymore about provision of an emergency type of service. It's very much on the mid to long-term effects of that. So we have to adapt to that. And providing an emergency response is not sufficient anymore today.
I see.
People in those part of those type of settings or conflict, they're asking for jobs. They're asking for employments. They're asking to go to the hospital. They are asking to go to school. And those critical infrastructures having been destroyed, there is no more access to that. So we have to really adapt to a short-term emergency response, but already thinking in our planning and financing multi-years impact of that on the civilian population, here on the social, economic, but also on the psychological impact towards mid to long-term response. And I think these are important programming that we need to have in mind very quickly in our planning, rather than before we would maybe delay a bit those response, or we would hand over that to development agencies or with this nexus of emergencies and development. Now, today, we have to adapt to that quickly because we've seen throughout, and one of the example is really indeed Syria here, where urban settings have been destroyed. Then you have really generations of population that are really lacking those critical infrastructures and essential services to rebuild their life, and life are being fallen apart.
Absolutely, especially the protracted nature of these conflicts. Yes. We're not talking about 1 or 2 months or years. We're talking about often decades sometimes, where these conflicts remain, and so the support needs to be able to sustain for that long at times.
You are very right. And for the ICRC, we have been involved in all those conflicts for more than 30 years.
Wow.
So
Absolutely.
Very protracted needs, protracted conflict. And here we have this urbanization of warfare, but we have other cumulative effects, in particular the climate, for which here we have, layers of problematics that are piling up on already layers of vulnerability to a given population. And climate is one of them.
Absolutely, Christine, and that's exactly the point I wanted to come on. What we're seeing now is that, climate change has become, we just have had COP26 and a discussion on climate change. And there's a very significant impact that climate change is happening on how armed conflict and conflicts between nations or within nations even is taking place. How do you feel that climate change is, shaping the potential for armed conflict in the Asian and the Pacific region?
Indeed, I think here the concern is very accurate, and I think we have acute. Even you have to be very aware that today conflict is not really a single thing. We just talk about the urbanization, but when you see situations like Afghanistan, for example, today,
Absolutely.
when we talk about drought, recurrent drought seasons, or floods, we have those cumulative effects. So you have a population basically living under protracted conflict for years without having access to essential services, struggling to maintain a social life, a normal life, if and at all possible.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then on the top of that, you had the climate change. And here you have it triggers a number of problematics here. Among them is displacement of population.
Of course.
And
yeah.
we have seen that in settings that are linked to conflict, but we have seen that also in other settings, particularly in Asia and the Pacific, a region that is very much affected by the climate change. And here it has not, sometimes it's linked to the conflict, but sometimes it is not. So we have to really incorporate those elements. And here we are working very much with a number of organizations that have been very vocal, that have been working for many years already on those aspects. And I think here the key word is to be able to prevent, to be able to have the element of prevention, anticipation, and working with others. Here, I think it's very
and being able
important.
to coordinate in that regard.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, absolutely. I think that's a very important area that we've touched upon. And do you feel that with climate change being such an important aspect of I think decision making going forward, that humanitarian organizations and humanitarian action in itself will have to evolve to be able to deal with this, especially in the coming years?
I think we have to, and this is the evolution that has started already. We mentioned few elements on how we have already in our programming changed the approach we had from a very emergency to a mid to long term. We have also to adapt our financial support, where we could plan for short term. We need now to have multi-years planning and financial support. We also have, because of the added value of the ICRC in those places, but also because we have been in those countries for many years, and we have a clear understanding of those needs. And we have, because of this access and this proximity we were talking at the beginning, I think there is a trust in our work. So we need to deliver differently, to deliver better. And for us, the challenge comes out also in terms of security and access that we said. So it's constant daily work of the team and the team I have in Asia and the Pacific towards those very difficult challenges. But nevertheless, at the end, we do the best to reach out and to advocate on behalf of the persons who have no voice, to be their voice, but also we advocate to government, to states, in the respect of international humanitarian law, in the respect of having advocacy around those very key issues. And that's what we do every day. And I'm surrounded by a team that does a great job.
Thank you so much. And Christine, I want to thank you so much for taking out the time. I wish we had more time to discuss all of these issues because we're having such a good discussion here, but thank you again. I'm sure our viewers will be delighted to hear your views on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Great.